Welcome to RH at Home. I'm Chad Clement, pastor here at Redemption Hill Church, and we're glad that you're joining us today. Last week was Easter Sunday, so we took a week off from our normal or our journey through the book of Matthew as we celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it was a great day for those who were able to be with us in person. Today we want to kind of pick up where we left off before Easter. We've been going verse by verse through the book of Matthew. And when we get to chapters 5 through chapter 7, it's what's called the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus, it's not a giant mountain, but more like a hill, has kind of ascended to the hill and begins to teach to those who are following him. His disciples are those who are beginning to follow and looking towards Jesus. And so chapters 5 through 7 is one sermon. And Jesus is going to touch on a lot of different topics, a lot of different things. And what we've tried to do, or the way we're approaching this, is to break it down into segments, which is a good thing and maybe a not so good thing. The good thing is it allows us to look at pieces a little bit more focused. The thing that we can't lose sight of is that all of this flows together. So when we begin the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins the Beatitudes, and he goes from the Beatitudes into like being salt and light. And these are all things that are directed towards believers and the way that they should act, the way that they should live, and the way they should be. And today we get in chapter 6, there's going to be a lot of different things, and really there's the first part, verses like 1 through 18, Jesus gives us, I guess what we could say are 3 spiritual practices that he's warning the people not to do improperly. Now, we're not going to look at all 3 today. In fact, we're going to look at verses 1 through 8. We're going to talk about giving, and then we're going to talk a little bit about prayer. Next week, we're going to specifically talk more about prayer, because the verses that we'll pick up after verse 8 is what's called the Lord's Prayer, and really an awesome passage. And so I want to make sure that we are able to give proper allowance of time to that. So we're going to be in our Bibles again in Matthew chapter 6. I'm going to start in verse 1. It says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward before your Father who is in heaven." So this chapter begins with beware, or look out, or watch out. A stern warning that Jesus gives, and he says this for practicing your righteousness. Now, what we need to understand is this section, as we read a little bit further, it becomes more clear. But this idea, this term righteousness here, it's meant to describe charitable actions or charitable gifts or actions done through charity. Okay? And so Jesus begins by saying, like, be careful, watch out, like, be aware of practicing your charitable gifts or your charitable actions, your good things, before other people, or like in a very public setting. Now, at first we think, well, this kind of goes against, earlier Jesus saying like salt and light and our lives should look different, and our actions should look different and should be visible to other people. And that's true, and Jesus isn't contradicting himself. But what we're going to begin to see here is Jesus is saying, don't do these things to be seen, right? Our primary purpose of doing these charitable actions are driving force between giving or praying or like I said, like next week we'll probably look at fasting. It's not so other people see us and are impressed by it. They're an outflowing of what the Lord's doing in our lives. But Jesus says, like, listen, don't do these things in public. Don't do these on the stage. Don't do these in front of people, because for the end of that says, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Okay, so Jesus says, like, if you're doing these actions with the intent or the purpose or the motivation to be seen and to gather or applause, earthly applause, approval by people, then understand that there will be no more reward. There's no reward, additional reward. There's no reward from heaven. There's no reward from God. Nothing. Like, that's it. Like, the applause, the approval of people, well, that's the reward. That's it. That's all there is. And Jesus will go on and he'll give some examples. In verse 2 it says, because thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpets before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So Jesus is going to use this idea. Again, he's talking about charitable giving, charitable actions. And the illustration he gives here is giving to help the needy, to giving, to help, maybe even within the church context of giving, like your tithes and your offerings. Like, those are good things, and we ought to be giving to the church. We ought to be doing those things. That's scriptural. We've talked upon it in the past, but Scripture is very clear that we ought to be supporting our church financially. All right, that we should be giving our tithes. That word tithe is an Old Testament principle of 10% to the church. And in fact, when we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul encourages those to give towards. Sometimes we ask, why should we give to the church? And Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is encouraging the believers to give to where they're being fed spiritually. Right? So it's important, I think, of primary importance that we support our local churches. Right? But Paul says here, he goes, listen, but when you do that, when you support to a good cause, like you're to do it secretly. You're to do it really in a way, when Jesus kind of uses this to the point where he's saying, like, secretly, he's like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Like, it should be that secret that you don't even really know what you're doing. Now, that's impossible, right? Like, Jesus isn't saying, like, when you write a check, close your eyes, or put one hand underneath the table, the other one above the table, eyes are closed. Like, he's not saying that, but what he's saying is the heart behind our giving should be done in a way in which we do it not to earn personal attention. See, really at the core of this, really when it comes to giving, it is a heart issue. It's a heart issue. The motives drive our actions. Okay, and when we see this when it comes to the giving, and there was some, obviously the understanding, the implied understanding of this is there were people during Jesus' time, much like there are today in our day, that would go to great lengths to make sure that their giving was done publicly, so everyone knew what they were giving, how much they were giving, what they were giving towards. See, it would have been done in a way in which the people saw that and would be impressed by it. And Jesus says that's not what you ought to do. Like, your motive, your heart. Well, it should be to please the Lord, not please people. Not to earn applause by people, because when that's the motive, it's done improperly, it's done wrong. Jesus goes on to prayer. Verse 5, it says, when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do. They think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Listen, in that same breath, Jesus goes from giving to prayer. Right? And He uses this word in verse 5. It says, when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. I know you probably know this, and we've kind of discussed this over the years, but that idea, that phrase, hypocrites, in the Greek, well, it was a term given to actors. So like in the old Greek, even during Jesus' day, the word hypocrite had probably taken on a similar understanding that we use it today, but in old Greek, right, that idea was a term that actors would use. It was like a mask. But when you would play a part, you'd put that mask on. You'd play that part, and you'd go maybe behind the curtains, get a different mask, and now you were playing a different part. That was where that word in the Greek hypocrite comes from. And Jesus says, like don't be like those hypocrites, because what they're doing when they're giving and when they're praying, they're doing it in a public manner. It's not genuine. It's not real. See, they're giving, and they're praying to earn people's favor. They're doing those things to impress people. Which is why ultimately what Jesus says is like, that's their reward. The reward in its entirety for them is when they do those things, and when they receive that reward. It says in verse, let me see here, at the very end of verse 5, it says, truly I say to you, they have received their reward. That idea, that Greek term used there for reward, or received their reward, that it was a financial business term. Right? It meant paid in full. And so in essence what Jesus is saying is that good deed you're doing, that giving to the poor, that giving to the church, or that prayer you did, the reward that you've received, the payment in full that you get back, are the applause of people, which won't last long. It will soon be forgotten. And Jesus says that's not the reward you ought to desire. Instead, He's striving for this idea of going and doing these things, not for man, not for people, but for the Lord. And this idea of prayer, He illustrates it this way. Verse 6, but when you pray, go into your room and shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. That idea, that Greek word there for store or room, that it didn't mean just like a bedroom or it was like closet, but more specifically, it would have been like a storeroom or a storehouse. It was a place where they would store their valuables, store their goods. And Jesus says, like, go into that area. That would have been a protected, hidden place that people wouldn't have just seen and known and had, visible access to. You would have been, really, in essence, almost hiding that place where you hide your valuables. And Jesus says, go into that room in private and pray. I love that picture. He says, for the Father who is in secret and hears you, and He rewards you. See, so much of our society today emphasizes status. Social media feasts on how many people follow you, how many likes you get, and how many whatever. Like it all drives that. All of these different TV shows, there's so much what they call reality TV that is complete garbage, but all of it tries to portray this idea of status. And all those things are earned by doing things publicly. And Jesus says that's not the key. Like the motivation for pleasing the Lord, the motivation for doing things for Him is not for status. It's not for man's approval. In fact, it's the opposite. Jesus is saying, like, really, if you want a reward, and this is really a separate subject, something that we probably don't think of often. But when you go through Scripture, you realize that on many occasions, all throughout Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament, the Lord talks about rewards. Right? And those rewards, y'all, check this out. We have opportunities we have opportunities to get earthly rewards from God. And my guess is, those of you who are watching this, you've received earthly rewards from God. But y'all know this. For those of us who have put our trust and our faith in Jesus Christ, who are believers, who are followers of Him, we have the opportunity to earn rewards in heaven. Rewards that we'll receive once we get to heaven. And so Jesus says all these things that we're doing, like if you do them properly with the right motivation, with the right heart, like you'll receive further reward here on earth and rewards one day in heaven. So why do we cheapen it? By just doing it so man can pat us on the back and say, good job. It's a heart issue. When it's all said and done, we look at the Beatitudes, we look at salt and light, we look at the other lists of different issues that we faced at the end of chapter 5. There are heart issues. In fact, we're going to get to this probably in about 2 weeks. But when you get to Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, Jesus says this: do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, nor thieves do not break in and steal. So Jesus is saying, listen, get your priorities right. Like what you're striving for, the things you're trying to accumulate, the things that you're working so hard for. Make sure you're doing the right things. You're aiming your treasure right, because verse 21 says this. He goes, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. These are heart issues. Giving is a heart issue. Right? There are some who only want to give if they're going to be recognized. Right? They might give a big check, and that could be to the church, that could be to some other Christian organization, that could be to some other community organization, whatever it is. But they'll give maybe a one-time big gift as long as there's recognition for it. One of the most beautiful things that I've had the opportunity over the years to see is when somebody works so hard to give that anonymous gift. We've been privileged over the years to receive some very gracious financial gifts as a church. And I love when it's done anonymously. Yeah, I mean, there's probably a check written, and there have been times where someone might come to me and say, Pastor Chad, like, we want to be able to do this, but we don't want anybody to know. What a beautiful thing. Because when they do that, and that shows that they're doing this out of love for the Lord, out of love for their church, out of pure motivations, or with a pure heart. I've also been to places where They want to give, but they want their name on a pew, or they want their name on a stained glass window. No, I'm not trying to judge those people, but they want recognition. They want their reward in man. Same with prayer. There's some that want to come up here publicly, do pray. There's nothing wrong with public prayer. I think it's a good thing. Like y'all, I don't think Jesus is saying, hey, if you're at a restaurant, you go to Outback today, don't pray. Don't let anybody see you praying. No, I think that's good. As believers, as Christians, I think we ought to take every opportunity to pray in public so people can see some of those things. But the difference I think that Jesus is painting here is these are hypocrites. Remember, use that word hypocrites? Meaning the only time they go and talk to the Lord, the only time they spend in prayer is when it's publicly, when everybody can see them. And then the idea is they get done with this beautiful, crafted prayer, and people are like, oh, wow. Look at how spiritual that person is. Oh, it's beautiful. They know so much. They're so God, and that's not the reality. They're hypocrites. It's a game. It's a facade. See, these are heart issues. When it comes to giving, when it comes to prayer. Jesus says, listen, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be also. So if your treasure is status, then you're going to do things to try to gain status and preserve status. If your treasure is finances, like literal gold, then you're going to do things to gain that and preserve that at all costs. And that's going to be what defines you. It's going to be what motivates you, what drives you. So these are heart issues. And Jesus says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. He says that in a few verses, but it's still applicable back here. When our treasure is the Lord, then we don't need status. We don't need recognition. In fact, we'll deflect it all to Him. So my encouragement to you this morning, this is a little bit maybe different of a message that we've had in the past, but my encouragement for you today as we think through these things, as you read through this chapter, and I would encourage you to read through all of this chapter, that you consider yourself, first off, how do you give? Do you give? Part of the implication here is people were giving. See, Jesus wasn't against giving. He just wanted it done properly with the right heart and the right motives. Maybe there's some of you as a church, if you've been around us at all, you know, we don't preach about giving unless we come across it in Scripture. Maybe there's some of you that aren't giving and you know you should be. Listen, you might be watching this and you might not have never stepped foot in a Redemption Hill church. You might be in another state, another country, somewhere else. I'm not saying that all that money needs to be funneled into Redemption Hill Church. This is not some kind of fundraising effort by us. No, you need to be involved in a church where you're being fed spiritually, and at that point, your primary giving to church ought to be done there. Maybe you struggle with the recognition part. Maybe you just need to take that deep breath. Get away with the Lord privately. Maybe as you see this whole picture here at its heart is the idea of being hypocrites. Maybe you realize today you're a believer. You know that you just struggle because you so badly want status. You want to be perceived some way. And it's not reality. And my heart, my prayer for you today is get it right. Spend some some time privately with the Lord, secretly, just being with Him and worshiping with Him and spending time with Him and growing deeper in love with Him. And let Him be your treasure. Let Jesus be your treasure. And that's where your heart will be. Listen, if you've made a decision about something today, or you have a question about something that we've talked about, or maybe we didn't really emphasize, but we just kind of touched on. And I'd love for you to send me an email. At the bottom of your screen, my email should be there. Just shoot me an email. I'd love to be able to correspond back and forth, be able to, whether it's to pray for you or to help you in any way. We love you guys. We hope to see you soon.